it does look like we have most of our folks are able to get in at this point. So again, welcome to our Understanding Standards and Depth of Knowledge, grades 3 through 5 webinar. This is part of our series that has each one of our grade spans. So we appreciate you coming today. This is sponsored by the Department of Education. So we want to thank the DOE for sponsoring this webinar series and allowing us to bring this information to everybody. Just a couple of logistics for this webinar. As we go through, you're all muted. We can't see you, so you don't have to worry about talking or anything like that, but also know that we don't hear your questions, even if you want to try to unmute. We do check the Q&A portion. So if you have a little toolbar that says Q&A, there's one that says chat, another one that says Q&A. If you could put your questions in the Q&A portion, we're monitoring that a little bit more frequently than we do the chat. So again, the Q&A, if you have any questions as we're going on, that would be great. So moving on here. Just some introductions. I'm Heather Jenkins. I am going to be sort of facilitating this conversation today. You can read a little bit about me. I work for Demonstrated Success, and we are contracted by the Department of Education. We have Annie Wallace here from the Department of Education. She is your math guru. So if you need anything math related, Annie's your lady. And then we have Jenny Cavallari, and she is your ELA person. So anything ELA related, she is your person to talk to. You can read all about us here, and our email addresses will be at the end of this presentation, so you can reach out to any of us at any time. So here's our agenda for today. The first thing we're going to be talking about is knowing your standards and just a general overview of the standards. Then we're going to go into understanding depth of knowledge, or what's called DOK. And then we'll talk a little bit about transferring the knowledge into the classroom, and then we're going to have some wrap up. I am going to turn my camera off. It's a little distracting as we go. So here we go. So knowing your standards, what your standards are, right? So they're obviously the expectations that inform and shapes your work in the classroom, right? It's basically the guide and everything that goes on to what you need to be doing in your classroom. It's your whole architecture of everything. Your academic standards are the set of expectations for what students will learn, right? So these are guided by the state. We do, in the state of New Hampshire, abide by the National Common Core standards. I know that some specific districts have a little bit of a derivative of that, but for the most part, they all are based on the Common Core, and it's what you think students should be able to do in their classrooms. So it's actually not even what you think, it is what has been decided upon by the powers that be, right? So why use them? Again, that's that framework that we talk about, and they're really helping us make sure that we are looking at our teaching and learning priorities. There are some standards, you know, we say that not all standards are created equal, but we really need to make sure we're looking at all standards to figure out those learning priorities. They're that guide to help you design any of your curriculum and your assessments. They all sort of go back and really point to what standards you're supposed to cover for your particular grade level. And then they help you ensure that all students have access to the same learning goals and expectations, right? So we can't just willy-nilly and go off on our own and say, well, we feel like teaching this today, right? Our standards are what guide everything and all of our expectations for our students. So knowing the standards, again, this is where we're looking for our standards. Our ELA standards are the Common Core. Our math standards are Common Core, and our science standards are the next generation science standards. So we are going off of those to make sure that we are teaching what we need to teach in each grade level. Also know within the English language arts standards, there are some writing standards that are for social studies and history. And also for science, there are some writing standards within this ELA core document here. Just so that you can understand, when you're reading your standards, if you go right onto the Common Core website and you download the standards, for the ELA standards, the way that they're broken out here is we have what are called domains or reporting categories. So for the domains or reporting categories for ELA, some examples are the reading standards for literature and reading standards for informational text. There's also writing, there's speaking and listening, right? But those are your domains or reporting categories. The way that the math standards are set up is it looks like this, and your domains or reporting categories are those big sort of umbrella areas like operations and algebraic thinking, numbers and operations base 10. Some have numbers and operations base 10 fractions. Some are, you can work with measurement data and geometry. So those are your big domains or reporting categories. For the next generation science standards, your domains or reporting categories are physical science, life science, and earth science. And within that, you have different topic areas. As you're reading the standards for ELA, once you get into a specific reporting category or domain, like reading standards for literature, underneath that, you have what are called clusters of standards. Some of the examples here are key ideas and details and craft and structure. So within that, you have your clusters of standards and then individual standards underneath each one. So we have standard 1, 2, and 3 under key ideas and details, standard 4, 5, and 6 under craft and structure. So as you're reading the Common Core standards, you start to hear a lot of terminology on, well, what's the cluster of standards or what is the specific standard, right? So clusters, this is what we're talking about. It's like a group of standards. Same thing for math. If you're looking at, this is specifically operations and algebraic thinking, that's your sort of reporting category or your domain. And within that, you have your clusters of standards and then each individual standard underneath. For science, your clusters, these are kind of your topic areas. And within that, there are a lot of different standards, and underneath each one of these, the next generation science standards are really detailed in all of the different skills and everything within each one, but they don't necessarily have, like the standards separated out. You'd have to really drill down into matter and its interactions to see everything that you had from there. So this is looking at here, the current Common Core ELA standards and the 3 key shifts. So this is Jenny.
Hi, everybody. So taking a little bit of a deeper dive into the ELA standards, however many years back, the folks that developed these standards thought that the purpose of the college and career readiness standards was to create an interdisciplinary literacy approach for the expectations. So they looked at these 3 key shifts. The first one is the complexity of text, and they decided that regular practice with the complex text in their academic language was a huge focus. The skills can't be taught, can be mastered when they're only practiced in isolation. And they looked for the standards to make a staircase of increasing complexity for students to be ready for college and career and life. It required that students grow their vocabularies through a mix of conversation, direct instruction, and reading. And finally, the one thing that you'll notice that you won't see is text names or strategies, because these ELA standards are meant to be mastery checkpoints, not the roadmap for getting there. The what and how of instruction is left to the districts. Reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from text, both literary and informational, was the next key shift that they looked at. And this means that teachers must focus on students' ability to read carefully and grasp information, arguments, ideas, details based on evidence in any given text. They said that students really needed to be able to analyze and synthesize what they're reading in order to present text-based claims which can then be elaborated upon. And historically, many teachers have put a heavy emphasis on writing what it based on students' experience or opinions. And while there is a place for this writing, that alone will not prepare students for the rigor of college and beyond. So that we really need to look at that grounded in evidence from the text. And finally, building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. This means that building background knowledge is really essential to student success. Students must be constantly immersed in reading and learning about the world around them if they're going to be successful readers who are prepared for college and life. Giving the stage to nonfiction ensures that students are developing a full range of skills and the focus continues to shine a light on evidence-based writing along with the ability to inform and persuade.
So I just want to interject for 1 second. I have somebody who continues to raise their hand. We can't unraise your hand during this particular webinar. So if you have a question, if you could please put it in the Q&A, we will definitely get to that. So I apologize to the person who keeps raising their hand. We're going to have you put your question in the Q&A and we'll try to either answer it directly to you, or we will, if it's something that's for the group, we'll share it with the group. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay.
Great. So the anchor standards are that through line, that thread that I was talking about for the ELA standards. And these are the 10 reading and writing. On the next slide is the writing ones also. And when you get access to these, to the PowerPoint, you'll be able to take a deeper dive, or you can go onto the Common Core website and you'll see that the anchor standards are identified by a strand, then the college and career readiness component, and then the anchor standard number. So for example, you might see R.CCR.1, and that would be reading college and career readiness anchor standard 1. So this is for the writing. Anchor standard 1 would be write arguments to support claims and analysis, so on and so forth. And from here, if Heather, if you can pop to the next one, you'll see that these anchor standards have a progression straight through to grade 12. And this gives you an overview of how that staircase is going to align from K to 12. And I think this is really important when any grade level is thinking about what they're teaching and how they're teaching it, because you really have to know where your kids are coming from, where they're headed, so that you can build out your lesson to expand upon that and to build the foundation depending on where you are in that progression. I'm working on getting more of these staircases developed for you so that you'll be able to see across the anchor standards what that looks like in a quick reference. So I'm excited for that.
This slide is Annie's slide. Annie,
you might be muted.
I think she might be.
Yes, sorry, I was muted. So as with ELA, the mathematics standards are also developed in the progression, and in K to 8, these are also internationally bookmarked. They provide the guidance and rigor in building conceptual understanding, procedural skills, fluency, and application, because all are important. Focus on the key concepts at each grade level and their developmental progressions and learning trajectories that help to build the coherence, linking the topics and thinkings across the grades. And these key concepts tend to occur over a 3-year period. They're introduced 1 year, really worked on another year, and then secured in the 3rd year. So the key concepts at each grade level. In K to 2, their concept skills and problem solving, all related to addition and subtraction. And here in grades 3 to 5, we're building on addition and subtraction and relating to multiplication and division of both whole numbers and fractions. In grade 6, ratio and proportional relationships, and then early algebraic expressions and equations. In 7, ratios and proportional relationships are expanded upon, and the arithmetic of rational numbers leading into linear algebra and linear functions in grade 8, which then have students ready for high school. You can progress the slides. Achieve the Core is a website that was really developed, and while they have both ELA and math supports and information, they really went into great depth in the math. So in each grade level, you can see the supporting and additional clusters for each grade. So the little green boxes really focus in on, these are the standards that are supporting the focus areas. Then you have the supporting, which are the blue squares, and then additional clusters, which are not related to the main focus areas, but are still important. And these tend to include most of your geometry and getting ready for statistics and probability. And along with that, next slide, please. They give a progression. So you can see the progression with the focus on getting students ready for Algebra 1 in high school and building that foundation for all their high school courses.
Right. So yeah, these particular progressions that we're showing you are from a site called Achieve the Core. Like Annie said, they do have some information for ELA. It does not look the same way as it does. There's no major supporting or additional clusters for ELA. In the same vein, we had a question in the Q&A that said, are certain standards, do they need to be taught in a specific order, or they're, can you do it in any order as long as you're meeting the standards? And I think it was specifically in relation to science, which I'm going to get into next. I mean, obviously math is a little bit different. There are, not, like I said, not all standards are created equal. So just to kind of talk about that, with math, it's a little bit different. It's probably the same, Jenny, you can chime in too, with ELA. There's certain things that you need to teach first to be able to have kids understand what to do with those skills that, they sort of build on one another. But when it comes to science, I have not seen any sort of science progression saying that you have to teach this particular unit before another, except to say that, in grades 3, 4, and 5, it gives you, these are the, skills for grade 3 and grade 4 and grade 5. And I'm going to get into that on this next slide here. So this is the progression of standards for the next generation science standards. So you can see here, this is a little bit of what I'm talking about here, where you have the K, and then here's all of your sort of topic areas for kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but again, also looking at 3rd, 4th, and 5th for what you are doing. Now, I do know that there are some schools that it doesn't follow this exactly, but they do cover all of these particular topic areas in grades 3, 4, and 5, but they might switch it up a little bit with which grade level teaches which, because maybe it goes along, they feel like, with their units a little bit better. This particular site here that I have this screenshot from is not the next generation science site. It's the NSTA. I just want to show it to you really quickly. I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. This is what this site looks like. And so now we're looking at, if we wanted to look at any of these subject areas, if I wanted Earth, space, systems, processes that shape the Earth, I would click into this. And this is where I was saying that all the individual sort of standards are within this topic area. So here's all the individual standards here. I can look at this. It opens this right up for me. Here's my science and engineering practices, the disciplinary core ideas, and any sort of cross-cutting concepts that I might be able to go through in different areas of my classroom. So this, I wanted to point you in the direction of this site. I hadn't seen this site. Melissa White from the Department of Education pointed us in the direction of this, and I feel like it's a really nice way to be able to see the science standards a little bit differently. The Next Generation Science Standards website is great, but it's this is the way that this is organized just is better for my brain for some reason. So I wanted to point you in the direction of this site. And then going on from here, getting off of the science, just talking in general of other ways to be able to understand our standards. So we've gone into a little bit of ELA, math, and science, but the New Hampshire SAS website, so that Cambium portal, if you just type in New Hampshire SAS, it will show up on your Google search. There are 3 different areas of the New Hampshire SAS site that we have used with a lot of different schools on having them dig deeper into their standards and understanding their standards a little bit more clearly. And those 3 areas are, they have what are called performance level descriptors. They have writing rubrics on the New Hampshire SAS portal, and they also have what are called modular assessments. So I'm just going to go through these really quickly so that you can be able to tap into them and look at them a little bit more in depth. It's New Hampshire portal, cambiumask.com. That's the actual portal that you get on if you administer any of the New Hampshire SAS assessments. So the summative assessment or anything like that, it's the same portal. And for this next thing where we have the performance level descriptors, this is one of the resources on there. So I've got the link right here, but just so that you can understand what the PLDs are, they're again located in the resource area of the Cambium portal. So the PLDs, they're rubrics that align to the Common Core and NGSS standards. And they outline each level of proficiency for a specific standard. And there's ELA, math, and science PLDs. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what each one of them looks like. So this is a 3rd grade example for the English language arts for the PLDs. So you can see here that we've got your 4 levels of proficiency, right? Below, approaching proficient or highly proficient. And then it lists the actual standard here. So reading literature, right? Standard 3.1. So this is telling me with a grade, and this is what standard number it is for reading literature. And this tells me what a student is doing that is below proficient, approaching proficiency, proficient, or highly proficient. Looking at this and checking out your standards and matching this up with your standards is going to have you really look at what do I need to have students doing to be able to be proficient in this particular standard. So, right, we're looking for proficient or highly proficient skills. So you're going to be looking in this area. So this is just a really great way to look at your English language arts standards. Here's what it looks like for math, same grade 3. We have the below, approaching proficient, and highly proficient. And then this gives you your specific standards. So this is grade 3, operations and algebraic thinking, standard 1. This is a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, and a level 4 student, and what they are showing you and able to do to meet that level of proficiency. So we found specifically for math, this is a really good way to figure out what maybe some of the common misconceptions are with the Common Core standards. We all know our standards or feel like we know them, and we interpret them in a specific way. This just helps me really hone in and make sure that my interpretation is in fact what is intended. Here are the elementary science standards, same thing. These are the PLDs on that Cambium website and under resources. So now I have my physical science and then all my topic areas here. And then what a level 2 student, a level 3, and a level 4 student is doing for that particular topic in that area of science. The New Hampshire SAS writing rubrics are also on that Cambium portal. They're under resources. This is an example of the informative or explanatory text-based writing rubric for grades 3 through 5. And the way that this is going is that we have a score of 4. And so when it comes to purpose, focus, and organization, this is what a student needs to do to score a 4. This is what they would need to score a 4 in evidence and elaboration. And then conventions is only 2 points, so it doesn't start until the next page here, and it would tell you what they would be able to do to score the 2 points. But again, this is a score of 4, 3, and then there's also a 2 and a 1. So you can, all of this is available on that Cambium portal for you to be able to take a peek at. And then the New Hampshire SAS modular assessments, these assessments are also on the portal. You can administer these, you can use them as test questions or just questions of the day. But we have found that when teachers look through the questions and understand the questions on the New Hampshire SAS assessments, that they really are able to dig into and understand their standards in a different way. So just a little bit of information on these. So they're short periodic assessments that correlate with New Hampshire SAS summative questions. These are not as long as the summatives. They're a lot shorter, 8 to 10 questions, maybe 12. ELA is a little bit longer. There's also writing, quick, writes that you can do for writing to simulate what they're going to be writing on a summative. All students get the same questions. All the questions are based on the Common Core, just like on the summative. The modular assessments are based on the domains. So if you're looking at 3rd grade and you're looking at numbers and operations fractions, you can do a modular on just that particular reporting category or domain. So you can match up with current units and you can administer them anytime throughout the year. There's no window. And they are administered at a current grade level or at appropriate grade level for students. The last thing is that you've seen on your screen the whole time, which is they help teachers gain a deeper understanding of standards and the depth of knowledge needed for students to be successful. It is a lot. These modular assessments have an amazing amount of information. If you have any sort of thoughts or questions, make sure that you put them in the Q&A or reach out to us. We can always answer some questions on the modular assessments. That's just a quick understanding of them. But you can also stay on afterwards and we can give you a little bit more information about that. We have a whole program that's sponsored by the New Hampshire Department of Education that helps people understand a little bit more about those. So the last thing that I have here is as we look at our standards, here are these are all live links. You're going to get a copy of this presentation in an email. They'll direct you to the folder. It's got a lot of the resources. The standards are in there. Some of the example pages and everything that we have are going to be in that folder along with a certificate for tomorrow. So you will have this presentation and you can click on any of these links and it will bring you right to that particular site and to whatever we're looking at here, whether it be the Common Core standards or Achieve the Core or the New Hampshire SAS modular assessments. All right. The question here, we do have a question that says, does Cambium have a training module to navigate all of these resources? It does not. There is once you get on that website, that's New Hampshire portal cambiumass.com, at the top of the page, you just click on resources and it will give you a list of all of the resources, and there's a little search criteria in there. But I will tell you that the PLDs, the writing rubrics, those are the 2 biggest resources. There's also what's really helpful is a vocabulary list for every grade level that does New Hampshire SAS. So there's one for grades 3, 4, and 5 for you folks. that gives you every piece of vocabulary that you will see on the New Hampshire SAS assessments, so that students can learn that vocabulary throughout the year. And I know that Annie is working on a math vocabulary resource, but it's not available quite yet. But those are the three resources that I would say to take a peek at.
Right. The math vocabulary hopefully will be up next week.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So, and also anybody who wants any training or help with going through these, feel free to reach out to any one of us and we'll be able to help you with that.
Mhm. All right. So next is understanding depth of knowledge.
Yes, depth of knowledge became better known after Bloom's taxonomy. And while Bloom's taxonomy is a hierarchy, depth of knowledge levels are not. So it's not about things getting more difficult or things just getting harder. It's rather about the cognitive rigor, which is really all about flexible thinking, seeing multiple possibilities and approaches and possible perspectives. And it's uncovering those multiple perspectives or approaches to a problem, which will help them understand the concepts deeply and apply them broadly in many situations. Tasks we learn as a beginner. So if you think about learning to ski or decoding words or using math formulas, may seem difficult at first, but the more we practice them, the easier they get and the more automatic they get. But that doesn't change the DOK level. So a more complex task, a DOK 3 or 4, requires students to really apply those memorized or internalized skills and concepts in new and more complex tasks. So this is similar to athletic teams learning and practicing skills like dribbling, shooting, passing, or somebody learning to play an instrument and learning the scales before they tackle more complex pieces of music. And they see and use them in multiple ways during the actual game. So again, depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy. In reality, tasks at a lower DOK levels are needed because that's what prepares students for solving and exploring the more complex non-routine problems. So you can't skip those drills and expect to do well playing in a game with your team members. It is a tool to help strategically scaffold learning so students can move from the basic to deeper understanding. And the number of steps is not the determining factor of cognitive rigor. It is the non-routine nature of how deep one step might lead to other decisions made and other choices made in solving a problem or thinking about what one is reading and applying it later in life or within that task.
Great. So like Annie was just explaining, these depth of knowledge levels created by Norman Webb, whether you're doing a read aloud or a close reading lesson, it's really important to make sure you tackle a variety of the DOK levels. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk through what this might look like at each level when you're doing an ELA literacy-based lesson. So at level 1, these are going to require receiving or reciting facts or using simple skills. This might show itself as referencing an area of a text verbatim, using a dictionary to find word meanings, recognizing figurative language in a passage that a child's reading. At level 2, this level will require both comprehension and additional processing of a text or a portion or a passage from a text. At level 2, the questions may be somewhat similar to level 1, however, a closer understanding of the text would be needed, possibly through paraphrasing. This might look like using context clues to identify the meaning of an unfamiliar word, predicting outcomes, identifying and summarizing major events in a story. Level 3 is going to have a deeper knowledge and understanding that becomes the focus at level 3, where students are encouraged to go beyond what's spelled out in the text. Kids might be asked to explain or connect ideas, and they'll likely need to support that thinking from evidence-based, using evidence-based understanding. Level 3 questions might explain how the author's purpose impacts a text. They might be summarizing across multiple sources, so pulling in multiple sources either within the same text or different texts. And then at level 4, this is where you're going to find your higher order thinking. These are often the extended writing activities that require students to take information from at least one text or passage they've read and apply that information to a new task. So level 4 is going to show itself as analyzing and synthesizing across text, examining and explaining alternate perspectives, describing common themes across texts. So that's kind of a quick summary of those 4 levels. And now I want you to take 1 minute and try it out yourself. So think of a book. I gave you a couple that we all know very well. So if you have a different emergent text that you want to think of, that's fine. But I want you to think through those 4 levels and take 1 minute and just write a question, an activity, a task that aligns with one of those 4 levels. And then if you can just jot it down, and if you're feeling brave, throw it in the chat. I would love to see what some of you are coming up with. We're just going to take 1 minute to do this, just to jog your brains in a different way for a second to shake things up. So 1 minute, work silently, throw something in the chat, and then we'll move on. On the next slide, Heather's going to show us this wheel that has some verbs and things to get your mind moving when you're thinking through these different levels, level 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, just take a couple seconds, jot something down. I would love to see some of those in the chat if you so choose. Annie, you can probably move on to math whenever you're ready.
Okay, Heather, if you can move to the next slide. So Robert Kaplinski has some nice matrices that you'll find in the folder tomorrow when you get the link, as to what differentiates in math a DOK 1, 2, or 3. DOK 4s in math are usually those longer performance tasks where you're applying multiple standards and strategies in one thing. So here we can start out with B as our DOK 1. Just determine whether the number sentence is true or false. Students have to know their math facts. They really can't answer the question without knowing that. So that's just saying, do they have the basics down? Then if we move on to C, we can see that's a 2. So using the digits 1 to 9 at most one time, fill the boxes to create 2 true number sentences. And then I move on to A, which is my DOK 3. So you can see how the cognitive thinking increases and rigor increases as you go along. So again, I'm going to use the digits 1 to 9 only one time, at most one time each, to fill in the boxes with a true number statement, but with the greatest possible value. So they really have to think about where they're placing the digits to get the greatest possible value with any of the digits 1 to 9. Here's an example of the 4th grade matrix, and grades 3, 4, and 5 are all included in the folder that you'll get the link to tomorrow. Okay, so Karen Hess has created matrices that mesh Bloom and Web together. So in looking at those matrices, and those 2 are in the folder, we can see what the cognitive demand might look like in the classroom along with Bloom's taxonomy. So Heather, move on. So here's the links in the slide. So if you clicked on N1, any of those, that'll bring you to that matrix. Thank you, Heather. So, but there will also be included. So this is for writing and speaking, and then they have separate ones for math and science and your arts and all the other content areas that you may be responsible for. So these are good. And remember, you can't skip the depths of knowledge. You have to develop DOK 1 in order for the students to successfully apply to levels 2, 3, and 4. And these show some links to understand your standards at more depth, and understanding your standards well can also help you in how you design those questions that you're asking and using with your students to bring their thinking up in the grade levels, as well as hitting Bloom's taxonomy too, about the rigor and more complexity and challenging them more.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about transferring this to the classroom. So as we're transferring it to the classroom, we would be remiss if we did not mention John Hattie, who is like the king of all kings of doing any sort of research on what it means to be a teacher in the classroom. And this particular quote, I'm just going to read it. When teaching and learning are visible, there is a greater likelihood of students reaching higher levels of achievement. Right. So as we look at our standards, as we figure out how our lessons are directly linked to standards, and we are giving students an understanding of what they need to learn, the higher the achievement level is going to be. So we really need to understand our standards, not just for learning targets, because it's not enough to put a learning target up by itself. But as we look at the learning targets and helping students understand how they reach the goal that we want them to have is going to be essential in our classrooms. So the next one here, as we look at this, so John Hattie, as he talks about visible learning, again, has one of the highest impacts on student learning and the effect of it. And that's, we need to be clear about what we want them to learn, right? And then sometimes, right, we're looking at those learning targets or objectives, I can statements. But the big thing there too is that student success criteria, right? So we have that learning target, but how do we get there? What does that success criteria look like in the classroom? So we need to make sure, we always talk about in our classrooms, make sure you have a learning target up, right? And we refer to that learning target as much as possible through a lesson. But as we're referring to that learning target, it's also really helpful to use the reference of, and this is how you can get there. This is what we're doing. This is how it relates to that target, right? So making sure that we're not just listing them, but putting in that, and adding that criteria so that students are really understanding where they are in this process as well.
These next couple of slides are just really in reference to what Heather was just talking about. It's just so important to make sure that we are putting the onus on the kids to make sure that they are driving their learning. So here we look at some standards right now as I can statements. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll see the transfer to that success criteria, making sure that kids know what to look for when they have mastered a skill or when they're being successful in their learning. So really framing for kids what it is that the expectation is and how they will know that they have been successful in achieving that.
And we can do the same thing in mathematics. So we take our standard and we have our I can statements. This is what we want students to do. So for reading, writing, and comparing multi-digit numbers, I want my students to be able to read whole numbers using the word expanded in standard forms. I want them to be able to write those numbers in all three forms, and I want them to be able to compare them using the comparison symbols. So I can support student ownership by taking those I can statements and turning them into I know I am successful when I can. So the student is now thinking in terms of themselves, saying, if I can do this, then I'm successful. And it kind of gives them a little checklist so they can check where they are. So do they have all three parts, or are they still working on some and not quite yet there? This is an example of a homework. We can take the list from the board or the paper that we have it on in the room, and we can also incorporate it into classwork or homework papers that we may be giving them so they can see them and remember them there. It can also be a communication key to talking with their parents about what they are learning.
Great. Here we see a student checklist. So this is important. There's so many standards, so many kids. It's really important to make sure that you have record of where you're at, how your kids are doing, and the mastery that they have achieved. So there are teacher-facing checklists, there are student-facing checklists. I believe Annie has done some work herself. I am going to be getting into the work of creating some checklists. This is just an example that you can look at just to reference today. But so make sure that you know when was your first touch point with these different standards. Has there been any reteaching? How are kids doing? Take some notes. There's no reason to linger on something if all the kids have it. So you want to know where each or where your majority lies and how often you're having to go back to those standards. Again, this is just so that you have some parameters when you're driving towards that end of year and those end of year benchmarks to make sure that you have hit on everything that you need to hit upon and that you are continually checking in on student mastery throughout the school year.
And here's an example of a math one, and drafts of these are up in the folder that you'll get the link to tomorrow. But it's taking a course competency that's been written to be a little more grade specific rather than the model competencies that are currently up there. So that's an example of something that's a little more course specific. And for that competency, here are the standards that would fall under that. And then you can see, do my students have these skills, or are they still working on them? Which ones have they achieved? Which ones are we still working on? So, in continuing our transferring to the classroom, we want to support student ownership. We want them to be active learnings and care about their own learning and be invested in their own learning. So through the triangulation of data, we'll be able to construct a more accurate picture of where our students are at. So you don't want to just use any one thing. And I know as classroom teachers, you're always looking at your students, you're listening to them. You have classwork, homework, assessment data. So you're pulling all of that together to get a full picture of where your students are at and what they're understanding and where you may need to scaffold more supports in. So tools that we have are scope and sequencing documents, curriculum mapping, assessment mapping, and our universal design for learning, which is a New Hampshire initiative. So in scope and sequencing, we can see where concepts are referred to overall. So the scope refers to the breadth and depth of the content, and skills covered in the sequence refers to how we're going to teach them. So sometimes there are planning guides that help support this with a particular text or program that you're learning. They may have also been put together by your school or your district. Curriculum mapping and scope and sequencing are pretty similar and are often interchanged in what they are. So a curriculum map may be a little more broad, whereas the scope and the sequence gets into more detail and may include lesson plans, activities, and assessments in them. And assessment mapping. Different types of assessments are used differently in the classroom, and looking at where our students are at and what they've learned and where we may need to scaffold and support them to bring them up to that learning. So taking a look at our assessments, what type of assessments are we giving? When are we giving them? And then assessment mapping can be as little as just writing things down on a calendar when you gave specific assessments that use, so whether it's a more formal formative assessment that you used in the classroom, or a quiz, or a summative assessment, and then you have your whole school like iReady and NEWAS that give a whole different aspect and looking at things from a different perspective, as well as the state testing. So keeping track of it, no, that's okay. By keeping track of it, you can help see where the crunch points are for students. And I know particularly around when you're doing that beginning of the year testing, mid-year testing, or end of the year testing, you may want to see where those fall so that you're planning classroom assessments not at the same time, or if you're working on a team, not every content area is giving an exam or a summative assessment on the same day. And so it works with backward design. What are you planning to teach, and how are you going to design those lessons, and what checkpoints are you going to have to see whether they've met those objectives or goals? Okay, Heather. So this is just an example of it. And the little picture at the top right-hand corner allows you to see the different types of levels of assessments you may have. And they all serve different purposes. So action and planning of using assessments, we want to ensure the assessments are appropriate for the specific purpose we're using them for. You're not going to use the state assessment as your formative assessment in the classroom. We want to design and select assessments that align with each purpose, and we want to make sure we're interpreting and using the data to address what the goal of that assessment was, or the purpose of that assessment was. And this is where PLCs within the team, within the content area, however they're arranged in your school, can really help support and collaboration to develop the assessments, help you look at the data. Are you seeing the same things across the board in different areas with the same students, or are there clusters that you need to relook at or replan a lesson for? And using effective classroom assessment strategies to inform the teaching and learning practices, we want to ensure we're using the right evidence for the right purpose. We want to improve skills in critiquing and revising existing assessments if necessary. We want to make sure we're having a deeper, deeper knowledge of current student understanding so we can make more informed instructional decisions. And this all supports the UDL. Like, are we taking what we're learning from our assessments and what we're seeing in the classroom, and then creating the proper supports and scaffolds for each student? And they can help us make more efficient and effective use of the information from the district and state level assessments also. So universal design for learning. Heather, did you want to take that?
Sure. So this is something that we really need to be looking at, because it's an approach of making sure that you're getting everything together with what you're teaching, your curriculum, and your assessments. So it is a way that we are looking at to transform what our focus is of what our expectations are in the classroom, what our demands are, changing our curriculum, and making sure that we are getting everything that our students need to know, and whether, depending on, no matter what level they are at, right? Like, so what are we looking at? How are we designing our learning experiences across all different levels of thinking rather than just looking at the middle? So this is looking at all students and all levels. And then we have this design here where we have this graphic in that is basically showing us what we are doing in our classroom. It's sort of a framework, right, for us to make sure that we have those supports in place, that we are scaffolding student learning, right? And then how are we making sure that our educational practices are happening and we are differentiating instruction as we are doing it. So it's that sort of backwards design again. So what do we want all students to learn, and designing it backwards to figure out how we are going to get all levels of students where they need to be. And then this last slide here is it's a quick graphic on ways that we can provide different types of engagement, how we can make sure we have representation of all different learning styles, and multiple means of being able to show what students are learning. So again, we have those learning objectives. What is the evidence we have that they're going to be learning? And how are we going to get that learning to take place in our classrooms, right? And again, all learners, not just your middle, but your bottom and your top, everybody in your classroom. What do we have in place for them to be able to ensure that they're getting to where they need to be as well? And what sort of resources are they going to be using, and what are they going to be tapping into in their own learning, and what sort of connections are they making to make sure that that learning that they're getting is internalized and being able to use to expand their knowledge. With this as well, we would be remiss not to show you a little bit of information about that Lexile Quantile Hub. So this particular website is an online platform, and it can be used, we're really showing it from an educator lens and showing you what you're able to do as a classroom teacher. So there's a lot of reading and math tools in there. It is sponsored by the DOE. Again, it's free. So I'll show you how to get there. I'll show you what it looks like a little bit. I know we're right on the end of our time, so I don't want to take too much time on it. But when we look at this, Lexile level we are pretty familiar with, right? That's a reading level, especially as we get up through the grades, we start really looking at Lexile to figure out how complex the text is. This quantile level is something that's a little bit new to some of us, and that is a measure of math skills at a specific grade level. And so both of these Lexile levels and quantile levels are listed on the New Hampshire SAS summative assessments. I just want to show you just a little bit about what's on the website. So some of the Lexile tools here is you can find different books, you can look at a book organizer, all of this information, looking at word lists at specific levels. The Lexile tools are all available to you. And then here are the quantile tools that they have available to you. Specifically, I would point you in the direction of this teacher assistant. So when it comes to understanding our standards, this Lexile Quantile Hub specifically for the math, the teacher assistant here is I could put in a specific grade level standard, and I can put the criteria in for that. And then once I open that up, it would tell me, here's all the skills that I am now teaching. It also will show you what the prerequisite skills were for that particular standard. And then if kids already have the skills for that standard, where you can go next. So it's this nice progression of here's what I'm teaching now, here's what they needed to know, here's what they can know and extend their thinking. And then there's resources at each one of those levels as well. So if I'm looking at a specific standard, it will give me resources like specific activities or maybe a video to go along with it. So it's a really great way to kind of take a look at some of your math standards. And if you want more information about that, you can hang on just a little bit, but I'm going to keep going. The link to the Lexile Quantile Hub is right here. The DOE also has a portion of their website that's devoted to the Lexile Quantile measures, and that link is right on the presentation as well. So you can look at that if you would like to a little bit later. And then this is the portion where we're sort of wrapping up and seeing if there's any additional questions that we have. So I'm going to ask if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A, and I'm going to go through these next few slides and we'll make sure to answer the questions. So just some information about some upcoming workshops and webinars. This Friday, we do have a Creating Effective PLCs and defining the MTSS model workshop. And unfortunately, that's full. We just wanted to make sure that you know that that is something that we might be looking at. If you're really interested in going to a workshop that's really about either effective PLCs or MTSS, if you go to the Demonstrated Success website, or even the DOE website has it on listed, and you go to register, it will tell you it's full, but it will give you the name of somebody to contact. We're trying to assess whether we should do another one of these workshops. So even though it's full, I wanted to put it on here because if you would like to, it's Elizabeth Dion at Demonstrated Success that is putting together a wait list or a possible list for a specific workshop for either PLC or MTSS. So that's on there. If you don't want to go to a full day workshop, we have this PLC series of webinars coming up. We've reworked them just a little bit, hot off the presses today. These two are going to be combined into one. So it's actually going to be a series of 5 webinars. And just look in your inbox. It will be coming from the New Hampshire Department of Education, where the links are for you to be able to register for anything PLC. And then we have some more coming up. If you enjoyed this workshop and you have some colleagues that you work with, we have the 6 through 8 workshop coming up and the grades 9 through 12. And then the next series of webinars after that, we have the performance and competency-based assessments for the grade spans K4, 5, 8, and 9 through 12. And then we do want your feedback, just so you know, when you log off of here, there's a quick survey. It's 4 questions. We always want to get your feedback on how we can make things better, what you liked, what you would like more of, etc. So please fill that out. It's super helpful for us. And then here is our general information. I'm Heather Jenkins. Tammy Hilton is on here as well. She's, I'm sort of our math person at Demonstrated Success. Tammy's sort of our ELA person. And then again, Annie Wallace from the state is math, and Jennifer Cavallari is ELA.